Hey everyone, welcome to Rebel Justice, the podcast from The View. Today we're talking with Suzie Miller, playwright of Inter Alia, about the impact of her play, Binary Justice, in the male upbringing. So the first question that I wanted to ask you is about the themes of Inter Alia. Mm-hmm. One of the themes in Inter Alia is how the law tends to see things in black and white, guilty, not guilty, right, wrong. Do you think Inter Alia challenges that binary approach?
It really attempts to challenge that, but also to show the fault line about things being seen in such a binary fashion as well. I feel that what the law does, and it's interesting because having also looked at the civil law, which is basically the inquisitorial system of Europe compared to the one in Britain and the common law countries of the world, they both try to get to the truth in very different ways. And the way that the common law system tries to get to the truth is to attempt to make it like science with absolute answers. And of course, that's just not how human beings are. So it's an interesting thing to examine, that we try to create answers that can only be yes or no, and we all know those sorts of answers are very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can get very messy and it's rarely black and white.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So how did you research into how boys are socialized through pornography and male role models? And did anything that you read about shift how you wrote Michael or Harry?
Yeah, it's interesting to me is that the key was really Michael, not Harry, because I think Harry is a typical boy that's being socialized by the internet rather than by conversations with trusted individuals or adults that are older than him. And I think that the sort of bro zone and the sort of manosphere and kind of the boy culture that has not been interrogated appropriately by anyone, really. I mean, we might sort of talk about it somehow, but we don't actually interrogate it. We don't actually take it apart or find ways for it to be a safer place so that boys can actually not have to subscribe to certain ways of being in order to sort of subscribe to masculinity. And I think a lot of it comes to me down to not how boys are born. It's not about men. It's about how we define masculinity. And I think the more we define it as something that has at its heart a misogyny and a secret telling about women and an idea about women that's reduced to body parts, and the way that women and jokes are told in sort of locker room banter, women don't have access to those spaces to interrogate that. So you think, who is interrogating it? And it seems that no one is, because the next generation of men also grew up that way. And even if they don't agree with it completely, they don't know how to interrogate it, or they haven't thought hard enough about how to. And so part of Inter Alia was me coming to terms with the fact that the men of my generation and younger than me as well, and are not really playing a proper role in terms of templating for younger men exactly what it means to be a good man. And I think that women basically raise boys, and I'm actually the mother of a boy and I'm the mother of a girl, so I see it from both perspectives really. And I think that all the women I know that are raising boys are hoping to raise boys that understand how to respect women and understand feminism and understand concepts around having good relationships and communicating, and also not creating a war between genders. Between the binary factors of genders. Of course, there's also all sorts of non-binary genders that I haven't even got to that yet. But, the idea that women are part of their lives, and up to a certain age, boys are taught to think about women and girls in a certain way. They're then thrown into this sort of adolescent deep end where their peers are not talking about women in the same way, and the information that they're subject to online is certainly not. And, the internet has so many great uses, but one of the things it does is have a very subversive way of talking to young boys. And often that's about women and making women the butt of their jokes, making women the reason that they're not getting access to certain things, which is ridiculous when you think about how so many generations of men have had all the access to everything. But I think what's really interesting to me was when I had a conversation with a man who sadly has died since this, I found out recently. But he was the partner of a friend of mine in Canada who I knew, they came up from New York to see my show. And I had a conversation with him after the show. And the fact that he's Canadian somehow meant something to me, because he was quite open about, trusting me with what his thoughts were about Prima Facie. And he said, what is the solution about all these women having such sexual violence in their lives? And then he said, I'm scared that as a man in my early 50s, and of all the men that I know, I think we're all a bit quiet about taking action because we're all a bit scared about being called out and cancelled ourselves. And the reason we're scared is we don't know how to talk about what we were up to in our 20s. And even though I don't believe I sexually assaulted or raped anyone, I can't be sure it wasn't coercive at times, because I guess what they were told was that women who refuse sex are the ones that you keep chasing, rather than thinking that they're saying no. And so the confusion about what is yes and what is no is something that men of a certain age still have. And I'm not sure, if they look back on their own sexual history, how many times they convinced someone to have sex with them that really might not have wanted to. And I think that conversation is now very much out in the open, but they're not having it with each other, and they're most certainly not having it with their sons or the young men that they have some care of. And so, because, one of my big aches when I wrote this was, what are men doing? Like, women are trying to raise these boys, not good boys, but boys that are spirited and able and can have conversations. And then somehow the patriarchy gets to them in their teens and they no longer are talking to their mother. So who are they talking to? And if they're not talking to informed men that are prepared to answer their questions, then they're getting their answers online.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you explained that really well.
The other thing is that, if you think about pornography and how it's absolutely everywhere now, like 24/7 online, and increasing in its kind of capacity to sort of try to arouse young men and to attempt to show them all sorts of different things that are possible. The young boys are using it as education, not just entertainment. And they're not even asked to interrogate what they're watching. So, for example, if you're watching even basic kind of porn, they're not asking, how did it come about that this is on my screen? And the other thing they're not asking is, when the woman on the video says no and then is convinced to have sex, or worse, is actually raped in the porn site, what they don't recognise is that this is a play acting approach that hopefully has had a contract that's been negotiated beforehand. And there's so many issues with pornography in terms of questions about how it got there. But in the in Inter Alia, what I'm scratching is the surface, where I'm saying is what you're learning about sex is not really what women necessarily want in sex. So you're being trained to activate your sexuality and to engage with young girls in sexual when you have a sexual relationship in ways that really are defined by pornography, rather than discovering your own sexuality through partnership and, and communication. So the increase of young girls having someone think that strangling is a commonplace thing within a sexual relationship is quite alarming. I mean, so often when someone's strangled and they can't actually talk anymore, they can't even say no, stop. So you don't want this sort of behaviour in the hands of young men who don't really know what they're doing, in any case, if you want it at all. But if it is, it's something that's negotiated in a very intimate relationship. So young boys are thinking that all of these behaviours that they see in pornography are something they expect of the young girls that they date now. And they're not having conversations with their dads or their big brothers or even godfathers or sports coaches. They don't have confidants to actually ask, is this normal? Is this something I should consider? They're just competing with each other in their peer group. And the sort of loudest, kind of more dramatic ones are the ones that get the attention and the sort of popularity of some sort. So it's a whole different pecking order. And I just think that it's time that men really step up, and it's not enough to say I support women. You've actually got to play a really strong role in educating the boys that are in your life by having those difficult conversations that women have all the time.
And you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I just think that, what was great about the play is that after people saw it, they often came out, and I would see men that I knew or men that I didn't know come up to me and say, I'm going home to walk my son around the block and have a really difficult conversation. Because there's so much at risk, and it's first of all, it's the girls that they're interacting with who are likely to be sexually harassed, or sexually assaulted or raped. But secondly is even for young boys, is this what we want them to think is their life, that this is their intimate relationship life, that they don't get to actually be open and honest and authentic in who they are, that they can't talk about their desires in a way that has a language around it? So I feel like we're hijacking so much about young lives in actually allowing this to just be what defines sexuality for all of the young people. And also, if I think about, just being the mother of a boy, that your boys are so open and honest with you to a certain point, and then they start getting different messages to what you've taught them, and they're not sure which way to go, with your peers or with your mother. Of course they're going to choose their peers, and they shut down that conversation with their mothers, and that's part of adolescence. But you have to know someone else is stepping in to counter some of the more extreme versions of what they're hearing about women, so that they don't have the shame of misogyny themselves. Because I know that a lot of young boys I spoke to said they're often in that room when so many things are bandied around as a kind of banterish joke, and they feel embarrassed because they know it's wrong. But if they don't laugh along, then they have the sort of cancelling of them as part of the group. So the only other people that have been in that scenario is really their fathers or men in their lives. So they need to have some clever kind of responses to get out of that, or they need to be able to challenge that and know someone else will have their back. But they also just need to be able to debrief about what that scenario and that atmosphere is. And we don't have spaces for them to do that.
It is so much about status in the social pyramid.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And you've spotlighted this issue really well, talking about Michael's character. I thought that scene where he kind of implodes, realizing that he may be, one of the perpetrators of these acts in his past. Yeah, I thought that scene was just really, really powerful.
And it's so interesting to me because the men, the silence when everyone sees his collapse, I mean, we also see her collapse, but we're so used to, women sort of crying out about the damage this is doing, that when we see a man cry out about it, I mean, it's so unusual for us that we really lean into it. But it actually makes total sense once you see it. You think, yeah, like now your son is in trouble because you didn't take that walk around the block and start to interrogate what other messages he was hearing. But also, what sort of subliminal messages are we giving boys when their fathers are always talking to them about their successes and not their heartbreaks or their vulnerabilities? They're not saying, like I also got rejected by a few girls before I found someone that really accepted me. And it's not about me, it's about just relationships, and that's normal. So, I think often parents and maybe mothers as well, we talk about our success stories. We don't actually disclose to our children the most vulnerable times of our life, or the times that we did feel like we weren't enough, or that we were rejected, or we felt like we were unattractive or whatever. And so our kids just see their parents as having got through it all fairly successfully in most circumstances. And as a consequence, they think that they're the ones that have got a problem. They don't have any outlet to talk about it. So I feel like we're not being authentic with our children by not talking about the things that we really stumbled around about. I look at Michael in the show and think, he's very successful in his job, but did he ever sit down with his son and say, maybe I wanted to be a musician, but I wasn't good enough? There was, they both love to play music, but he sort of is happy to have himself kind of as the successful man in the house, and feels challenged whenever anyone suggests that, it's not just about that, it's about other things too. So, I mean, for me, what I loved most about the play were the audiences coming out and going, I never thought of it like that before. I never thought that it was a male responsibility to actually start to really engage in a way that makes you vulnerable with young men, so that they actually can disclose things that they feel nervous about as well.
And you've actually beat me to my next couple of questions. The first one being, have there been any unexpected reactions from the audience or viewers?
Yeah, I mean, I think my most unexpected is, and this is unexpected because I think when you write a play, you're aware, if you're writing from a very feminist perspective, that men often feel uncomfortable or blamed. And I think what was unexpected for me was the amount of men that came up to me and suddenly saw that they had maybe not done enough in terms of raising their own sons and the young boys that they'd let out into the world. But I think they all secretly have the same anxiety that Michael has, which is, I don't want to talk about this stuff in case I get called out for something that I'm not aware maybe in the past I've done. And I think that anxiety is a very real anxiety for men of a certain age, because there was a different set of social expectations at the time, and there was this myth that women say no and have to be won over. And yet, women that say yes straight away were seen to be sluts or loose women, and they weren't the ones that you were necessarily going for. And there was and as he says to his wife, there was a dance and we all played it. Like like you also were sort of reluctant until I won you over originally to be my partner. That was the game that we all played and we were expected to play. And, so we all did play something like that, a bit hard to get, so that there was a bit more desire on behalf of the partner. But some of those games don't necessarily move into your sex life. And I think that, it's a really complicated area. And I think the play tries to sort of show, not tell, what some of the issues are, and the little things that we can do to protect the next generation from exactly what happened before.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. And I think that as we get older, like, not much kind of changes our perception of things, and like we're kind of more rigid in what we think, and we don't interrogate our choices anymore. So the fact that this play got through to some older men is really impressive.
I think because I was eager to understand the why we're allowing our boys to sort of be buried under the weight of this, this understanding of sexuality, and to be defensive about women calling them out on things. And I thought, where does it all come from? Why are men so defensive about feminism? It actually is about releasing them from some awful stereotypes as well. And also releasing them from this ultimate provider mentality that their lives are about having a family and providing for every single member of that family and going out to work constantly. But the other thing is, it sets them free to be vulnerable and relationship-based human beings. And I don't think any power is worth it if you can't have authentic relationships. So whatever they're trading to get that power might not be worth it. And I think that if they actually could see it from another perspective, they would not want that for their sons either. And they would think, how can I help my son be someone that has good relationships and a life that's valuable and authentic?
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on this next part as well. I wanted to ask, you were a criminal defense and human rights lawyer before transitioning into playwriting, highlighting important social issues. How do you use playwriting as a tool for change?
I realised while I was a lawyer and when I was in court every day. And more often than not, I would be doing a sentence matter for someone who had had a really awful childhood and had been found guilty of a stealing offence or something more serious often. And there would be a real risk of going to prison. And so I would take their story and explain their story to the judge in a way of showing that there's a time where the state has to have empathy for someone that has never had any intervention other than the criminal justice system, and that there has to be a time where we think, wow, how did we let that child suffer that long in a household without the state intervening? And I think that what I then would put to the court is, this is a young person, this is his name, this is his story, and we actually in my view, we have an obligation as part of the state to actually say it's not just a straight to jail, that's the end of your life story. We have to see what else is possible. And I think that in telling those stories, I often had very different results to other lawyers. And I just started to realise the significance of storytelling, and how if you tell a story, even to the hardest judge in the world, that actually forces them to have empathy for someone because they can actually feel what they went through to some extent, then that judge was like putty in my hands in terms of what I wanted next. And I thought, like this tool of storytelling, maybe I could use it in a different way. And I feel like I don't have the answers. All I have is the story to tell you. That's often one that I've made up, but it's often built around something that's very true, or that's a value or an issue that's significant to me and to others. And I feel like in telling the story and trusting that the audience will find a way into that story that will shift the way they think about things is one of the most wonderful things that you can feel that you're doing in the world, because storytelling is as old as human beings. We've told stories since we had language. And I think sitting around a fire telling a story, the whole idea of it was not just to entertain, but to shift things in human form, like to actually change the way someone thinks about something or the way they feel about another person. And we often do it without even thinking. We tell narratives all day long, and we tell stories about other people's lives with a certain scope. And I think theatre does that beautifully. But the other thing is that we've learnt this through COVID, is that now we sit, in theatre we sit shoulder to shoulder with complete and utter strangers, and we breathe in the same emotional mist at the same time that it's happening live right in front of us. And there's something about that is so completely unique. And, when Netflix was first on the scene, there was a lot of talk about theatre not being significantly important anymore because it's easier to stay at home with the heating on and a pause button to be able to make yourself a cup of tea. But the reality is, when we went through COVID, we all realised the significance of assembling as human beings, as being in the same place together, that there was something fundamental about that allowed us to be community and allowed us to affect change in ways that doesn't happen when you're just at home in your living room with the people that you live with. And to me, that's exactly what theatre does on, all around the world every night or every day. And I will always be committed to that nature of community, that people come together and assemble, are prepared to experience something live, and they're open to feeling something if it moves them and sharing it with the people around them, like crying together, clapping together, standing up to leave and turning to the person who was next to you, asking them what they thought. And to me, that is the beginning of shifting, of shifting things at a really grassroots community level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really related to what you said, because I'm a screenwriter as well. And we all hide messages in our work. So I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think that what happens is sometimes, also with screenwriting, because I screenwrite as well, but there's something about theatre where you start with an idea and then you dress that idea up in a story, and the audience experience the story, and if the story affects them enough, they also then come face to face with the idea that sparked the story.
Yeah. So you've suggested that Inter Alia. You call it Inter Alia?
You know what? I do call it Inter Alia, but some people call it Inter Alia, and okay. It's very hard to know. I never ever have a title for a show that ever makes sense to anyone. No one can ever. Them.
You suggested that Inter Alia may be the second in a loose trilogy where you move through different perspectives related to law, gender, and ethics. Can you tell us anything about the third play? Is it from the accused perspective?
No, it's not, actually. It's leaning into the jury as representative of all of us and how we bring our own stories to the table when we experience something or when we are asked to understand someone else's story. And I feel like I'd really want to interrogate what the jury bring, because the juries are the ultimate decision maker, and we don't even recognise the sort of social myths that we have entrenched in our own kind of psyche when we come to the table to talk about things that connect to gender and to gendered violence.
Yeah, absolutely. You were in China recently, is that
right? Wow, I was,
to do some press tours.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah.
That was with Inter Alia, the NT Live, because they've actually filmed the play and it's gone out on NT Live, which is in cinemas. The interesting thing is, in China, both Prima Facie and Inter Alia have both been absolutely embraced by that culture, which is fascinating to me on so many levels. And I think going to China and meeting my audience there was actually really special for me. Just all the people that came out to see the NT Live version of Inter Alia or to stay for the question and answers. I mean, I'm talking so many people, and they all had really strong views and lots of questions and, other sort of interrogations that they were interested in. But just generally, it was an amazing and culturally specific experience, because I'd never been to China before. And, it's always good to be the outsider somewhere, to see things through a different lens. And in China, I was so well looked after. I have to say that everyone was so good to me. But, I still didn't speak the language, or the food was different for me, different ways of being. And so that, really gives me a new perspective on life as well, to be honest.
well, you definitely deserve the applause.
Very kind.
And I will be seeing the third play when it comes out.
Well, it's not for a while yet, but thank you.
Thanks so much for speaking with me, Susie. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thanks for listening to Rebel Justice. Remember, justice isn't passive. It's something we build, challenge, and fight for every day. If today's conversation resonated with you, keep it going. We'll be back soon with more voices and more stories.